Hey, it's Kyle here. Today I'll be doing basically a video topic that I haven't done before. It's kind of a little bit of variation on something that I do every year, but I've never done it quite on this scale, I guess you could say. For long-time viewers of this channel, you know at the start of each year, I like to look back at my favorite books I read the previous year, and I'll do a top 5 ranking. I'll do that for fiction, nonfiction, and this past year I also did a category just for Star Wars books. And I randomly just got to thinking a couple weeks ago, I was like, I wonder if I went back and took a look at all those lists, and I took my #1 rankings, and then I kind of created a new top 5 list for my 5 favorite books from the past 5 years. What would be my favorite book? What would make the top 5? So that's what I went and did. I went back and looked at the last 5 years of videos I did on this topic, and I pulled my favorite fiction, nonfiction, and also my favorite Star Wars book from each year, since I did start doing a separate Star Wars ranking this past year. So all those #1 rankings were put into one kind of big pile, and from them I picked my 5 favorite books from the last 5 years. And I will say, when I started doing the list and stuff, there were some ones in there that it's like, it was a little bit of a challenge. Other ones I think maybe I enjoyed a lot then, but now I was like, this year's #1 was a lot weaker than another year's #1. You know, even on a couple occasions, I was like, I'm actually surprised that was my #1 that year. I would actually, if I re-ranked them now, another book from that year might be my favorite. But just for this list, I just took the books that did get that #1 ranking and kind of compiled them together and see which ones became my favorite. So the one thing I will say, I combined all the categories, so I'm not doing a separate video for fiction and nonfiction. These books will be some fiction, nonfiction, and in the fiction realm, some Star Wars books. So with that all being said, I'll get started with my 5th favorite book from the last 5 years. And it is the Library book by Susan Orlean. An amazing nonfiction book that takes a look at an event that happened in Los Angeles where their main library was destroyed in a fire. And it takes a look of kind of the mystery about what caused that fire, who was accused of it, did they really do it, but it also explores basically the history of libraries, why libraries are so important, why books are so important. And I think for anybody that loves to read, and one reason I really enjoy this book so much, it makes you really understand why you love books so much, and in a lot of cases why you love libraries so much. I have had a big passion for libraries ever since I was a little kid. Where I grew up, there really weren't any bookstores, so the only place to really get a book was the local library, and I remember really looking forward to always getting to go there and kind of picking out a book to read and stuff. So I've always loved libraries, so this book really explained to me, you know, like the history of libraries, why libraries are so important, why people love them so much. But also I kind of explored this mystery, so you get a little bit of a kind of almost a true crime mystery mixed in there with the exploration of the history of libraries and books in general. So I think it's easy to see why a book nerd like myself really love this book and why it got #5 on my top 5 list for the last 5 years. #4 is fiction. It is Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. It is a part of the Red Rising series. If I expanded this list to my favorite books from the last 10 years, Red Rising, the first book in the series, might be my favorite book. I don't know I had to go that far back. I can't say for sure. But Red Rising is one of my favorite books of all time. Love it. And Iron Gold is basically book 4 in the series, and it's kind of starting of like a new trilogy within the series. It's not my favorite book within the series. I think I definitely, Red Rising's that. But I really love this book, really enjoyed it. Obviously I did because it made my favorite fiction book from the year it came out. But I love Iron Gold so much, and the series in general, that there really hasn't been a book in that series that I haven't enjoyed. I think every book in that series has made my top 5. Some years it's just, you know, first, second, third, it varies where it ends up, but it's always very highly ranked. And one thing I do want to mention, when I mentioned Iron Gold, that is the favorite book that came out. Some books like Iron Gold I did read the year it came out. Some other books, like the Library book is a good example. I read it a few years after it had been published, so the years it made my top 5 was not the year it's published, is the year I read the book. In some cases the book had been out for a long, long time. I just wanted to do that quick clarification. But onto the Red Rising series, if you really love sci-fi with a little bit of dystopian mixed in there, check it out. I think a lot of people didn't check out Red Rising when it came out because a lot of people grouped it into the YA dystopian fad that was going on when the Hunger Games came out, and then you had stuff like Diverge and all these other, the Maze Runner, stuff like that. And Red Rising kind of got grouped into that because the main character at the beginning of the book is a teenager. But that's the only thing it really has in common. It's not YA. It's much more military sci-fi. It's a lot more denser than YA. I think that's why some people read it. Like, I was expecting the Hunger Games or Diverge. This is not it. This is kind of a really long, lengthy book. And like some people who normally would have read it as sci-fi just heard like, oh, there's a teenager, main character is dystopian. Oh, it's one of those dumb YA dystopian books. I'm not going to touch it. If you did not read Red Rising and you enjoy sci-fi, you need to read it. It is an amazing book. I think it'll hook you and you'll want to read the rest of the series. Got really excited. Pierce Brown I saw on Instagram, I think it was a day or two ago. He made a post that basically announced in the next year or two, the next 2 books in this series are coming out, and I am so excited for that. So Iron Gold, number 4 on my 5 favorite books in the last 5 years. Next up, you have another fiction sci-fi book. It's Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Andy Weir is probably best known for doing The Martian, which is one of my favorite sci-fi books. It's amazing. Project Hail Mary. I think I like The Martian a little bit more than Project Hail Mary, but Project Hail Mary is a close second. It is an amazing book. Loved it. It's such a really interesting sci-fi story. Don't want to go into too much details to spoil the plot, but basically humans on Earth start noticing something's wrong with the sun, and it's suddenly starting to basically like lose power. And basically they realize life on Earth is not going to last much longer. And they're able to quickly figure out some other stars have been impacted in a similar manner. So humanity kind of launches one last effort, a Hail Mary, to try to figure out what happened to these other stars in hopes that they maybe will help them figure out how to reverse the situation on the sun. And so this book kind of follows the individual who gets sent on this Project Hail Mary to try to save Earth. And it is an amazing book. If you've read The Martian, you know Andy Weir includes a lot of humor in his book. This book's very much like that way. But he tries to ground it as much in scientific realism as humanly possible. So it's much more a realistic sci-fi book than some other science fiction books that people typically read. I love the way Andy Weir writes. This book was so interesting. It had me guessing along the way. I did not know what was going to happen. Loved it so much. Really, really, really recommend Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And the great thing about Andy Weir, all his books so far have been standalone books, so you don't have to really, when you're reading one of his books, you're like, oh, if I like this, I'm committing to read 7 or 8 books. I don't really have time to do that. I already have a lot of them books on my to-be-read list. Andy Weir, with his books, you're like, oh, if I like it, it's great. I don't have to read 5 more books to find out what happens. I can just read this one book and I get conclusions. And every once in a while, those standalone books are really nice because of that. So, number 3 on my list, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Next up, we have the highest nonfiction book on the list. And I will say I had a really hard time deciding between number 2 and number 1 who was going to get that slot. But at the end, I went with number 2, The Devil in the White City by Erick Larson. Erick Larson might be my favorite nonfiction author. Love his works. Every one of his books I've read, I've really enjoyed a lot. Devil in the White City, I believe, was my second book of his that's read, and it's by far my favorite. It's such a fascinating book. And a lot of times, Erick Larson does, he takes a historical event and kind of examines 2 separate instances and then kind of intertwines them to show how they connect. Also, his books tend to read in a lot of ways. He really does a good job of kind of figuring out a historical plot that you can kind of explore throughout the book. So it kind of reads a little bit more like a novel than your typical historical book. History book, I should say. And it's not that he's fabricating stuff. He just is a very talented writer and making it read more like a story than like just a textbook. For people like me that enjoy reading nonfiction, I'll read a textbook anyway. But those ones that do read like a novel make it almost even more fascinating. I think I also like it a lot because I know like, oh, this is opening up history to people who typically don't like reading history books. Devil in White City, kind of basic scenario, is set during the Chicago World Fair in the late 1800s. Let me see, 1893. There we go. And explores everything that happened with this World Fair. It's one of the most influential events in that period in American history and really world history. There's a lot of big scientific breakthroughs Throux's debut at the World's Fair. A lot of concepts about city planning, stuff like that debut. The story behind the World's Fair, how it came about, how it was built, how it happened to be in Chicago is fascinating. At the same time, you have basically America's first serial killer constructing a hotel that is his own murder palace. And it is horrifying. So you get this one, this story that's so uplifting and optimistic about, you know, what great things lay in humanity's future as they go into a new century, and the other side you're seeing the worst of humanity, almost something that's so evil you don't think actually happened, but it did. Which that refers to the devil. The White City refers to the World Fair part. Fascinating book. If you've never read this, really recommend it. If I could get you to read any nonfiction book on my bookshelf, this might be the book I pick. Because I think for a lot of non-history people, this book will really hook you. For history people, I think you'll just be utterly fascinated. So Devil in White City by Erick Larson was my second favorite book the last 5 years. My favorite book from the last 5 years, it's a Star Wars book. I was actually surprised only one Star Wars book made the list. But it was Light of the Jedi, which is the first book in the High Republic series, which is a series that just started last year. This book is absolutely amazing. It hooked me. The first half of this book is the most action-packed beginning of a book I have ever read. It felt like you were on a roller coaster, and you kept like, is this ever going to end? It's not going to stop, and you enjoyed it, but in some ways you feel like, I need a break. So about halfway through the book, they finally give you a little bit of break before they give you a really amazing conclusion. But it really hooks you into this new series. Because when I heard they were going to do this High Republic series, which the basic concept is going a few hundred years before the events of A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, stuff like that. It's basically exploring the golden age of the Republic and the Jedi. And in Star Wars, I've never really been that interested in looking back into the ancient past of that one. I know that's even going into the prequels. I wasn't super interested because I was always more interested in like what happened after Return of the Jedi than what happened before A New Hope. I was somewhat interested, but I'd always preferred to go the other way. So when I heard they were doing this High Republic series, I was like, well, I'll get the first book, I'll see how it is, but I don't know if I'm going to commit to read the series. This book instantly hooked me. I think even before I finished, I was like, oh, I'm reading the next book when it comes out immediately. This has me hooked. It is so well written. The great thing, I would say, you don't have to be a Star Wars fan to read this series because it does not connect to the movies whatsoever. So you can come into it with no Star Wars knowledge, read this, and if you're a sci-fi fan, in some cases I would say a fantasy fan, this book is going to blow you away. It is amazing. It'll introduce you into this world, and I think, like me, you'll go like, all right, I have to read this series. The characters are amazing. These scenarios are amazing. The technology they explore is amazing. A lot of concepts that they explore is really cool that I enjoy throughout the series. Love this book so much. So Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule, part of the High Republic series, is amazing and my favorite book that I've read in the last 5 years. So in the comment section below, let me know, have you read any of these books? Did you enjoy them as much as I did? And go back and kind of figure out, what is your favorite book that you've read in the last 5 years? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you have yet, please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. I think somewhere above me, I'll probably link to my playlist where I do all my book reviews. Because I think all these books I just mentioned, I've done individual reviews on. So instead of trying to link to all of them, I'll just link my book playlist above, and you can go check that out. So I don't know which side that's going to be on, but it'll be somewhere up there. So check that playlist out for those reviews and all my other book reviews I've done on this channel. Again, I hope you enjoyed this. I'll see you the next time, and happy reading.